Now I'll start my story, which I hope you'll find interesting. I was born in South Africa 97 years ago, and after completing 4 years at university, the University of Witwatersrand, same university where Les studied, I joined the South African Air Force. World War II had started, and when I finished my last examination in December 1940, I put my pen down and I joined the South African Air Force as a volunteer. In South Africa, interestingly, there was not conscription during the war because of the political divide between the English and the Afrikaans-speaking section of the community. I was trained as a navigator, bombardier, and I served in the Air Force from January 1941 to the end of November 1945. You may remember that Germany surrendered in May 1945. Our squadron was on standby to go to the east in the war against Japan. The 2 atomic bombs were dropped in August and the war was over. Like all other servicemen, I was rehabilitating myself after the war. I started a small office. I had studied and I got 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Commerce and a Chartered Accountant. And I met my wife, and she, in fact, had also served. Thank you, Lauren.
Excuse.
Yofi. Now, who's for the cappuccino?
That's wonderful.
All right. And I really got to the point where I said that I was rehabilitating myself after the war. I met my future wife, and then we saw the war clouds gathering over Palestine. I felt it was a duty to serve the Jewish people, and I told my wife, my future wife, we have to postpone our wedding because I'm going to Palestine. And she said, well, I'm also going to Palestine. So we decided to get married, and we came over as a married couple. We were in the first group of South African volunteers. We arrived in Palestine on the 9th of May, 1948. We signed on for the Air Force on the 10th of May. And as you will remember, Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel on Friday, the 14th of May. Very same time as we're sitting together. And on that very day, at that very time, I had the privilege of flying on the first mission of the Israeli Air Force. Jordan was the first Arab country to invade Israel. They started their invasion on the 14th of May. And we were ordered to do a reconnaissance over Jordan and to give a report to the General Staff as to the strength of the invading Arab force. The Jordanian force, which was also known as the Jordanian Legion, had been trained by the British. Their officers were British, and it really was a very sobering experience, seeing their tanks and their armored cars and their artillery and their troops. And then we saw that the Etzion block had been overrun and the whole area had been burned down to the ground. We learned subsequently that 240 civilians and military were killed and 420 were taken prisoner of war. And as I said, the kibbutz was razed to the ground. We gave this somber report to the army, and I think the army was fully aware that we had a very, very dangerous period ahead of us. On the 15th of May, on that Shabbat, 5 Arab armies attacked Israel, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Qawuqji's forces from the Galil. Now, from an historical perspective, the end of the British mandate over Palestine and the Holocaust and the declaration of the State of Israel and the War of Independence was a constellation of the pinnacle of Jewish history of 2,000 years. All the momentous events coming at the same time. The attack of the Arab armies on the 15th of May really started the War of Independence, which was Israel's longest war. It lasted from the 14th of May to the 7th of January 1949. It was Israel's costliest war. We lost 6,300 people who were killed, thousands were disabled and injured. And just to put that into perspective, America has a population of 330 million. 1% would be 3,300,000 casualties. And Israel suffered 1% of the population of the Yishuv, which was something like 650,000 souls at the time. So 1% of the population perished in the war. Now, the military imbalance between Israel and the 5 Arab armies was overwhelmingly in favor of the Arabs. The Egyptians, for example, had 62 Spitfire aircraft and Italian Macchi aircraft, which were frontline combat aircraft during World War II. Israel did not have a single combat aircraft and not a single anti-aircraft gun. The imbalance was absolutely overwhelming in favor of the Arabs, and not a single democracy came to Israel's help. The only country that was prepared to help Israel was Czechoslovakia. There was a United Nations embargo on the export of arms to the Middle East, which meant that officially Israel could not buy or acquire military equipment due to the embargo. In addition, the United States passed the Neutrality Act, which made it a serious offense to export military equipment without a permit. This was a very serious situation indeed for Israel, because not only were there United Nations observers swarming in Israel, there was the FBI and the CIA and Britain's MI6 and Scotland Yard, who were all involved in trying to stop Israel from acquiring any military equipment. And there were several predictions of doom at the time. The United States Secretary of State stated that Ben-Gurion's decision to declare the State of Israel was irresponsible, it was reckless, Israel would be crushed within 2 weeks by the Arab armies, and that would be a disastrous situation. The British Foreign Minister, Ernest Bevin, who was a rabid anti-Semite, also predicted that the war would be over within 2 weeks. And the Arabs predicted with a lot of chutzpah that this would be the end of the State of Israel within 2 weeks. The start of the war went very badly for Israel. As I mentioned, the Etzion block had been burned down. Jerusalem was under siege. The road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem had been cut off. No water, no food, no ammunition coming into Jerusalem. The battle for Latrun, which was a very strategic fortress which the British had built and handed over to the Jordanian army, was a strategic point of defense for the Arab Legion, and they controlled the whole of that area, which enabled them to continue the siege of Jerusalem. The Egyptian Air Force was bombing and strafing Tel Aviv and targets in Israel day after day. By the 29th of May, exactly 2 weeks, as the Americans and the British and the Arabs had predicted, the Egyptian forces arrived at Ashdod, 30 kilometers from Tel Aviv. They had overrun the kibbutzim in the south. The spirit of fighting of the kibbutznikim was absolutely fantastic. With just a few mortars and rifles against Egyptian tanks and armored cars and artillery, it was totally impossible for them to put up a stand against Egyptian forces. And so the Egyptian army arrived at the gates of Tel Aviv on the 29th of May 1948. And then a miracle of biblical importance happened on the 29th of May 1948. The Israel Air Force received its first 4 combat aircraft. They were part of 25 aircraft which Israel purchased from Czechoslovakia. The aircraft was known as the Avia S-199, but it was popularly referred to as the Messerschmitt. And the Messerschmitt was a famous fighter aircraft of the German Air Force during World War II, but these aircraft, part of the German aircraft, were manufactured in Czechoslovakia. So there were different components still around, and the Czechs built this aircraft. Israel purchased 25 of them, and I'll explain in a few minutes how those aircraft arrived in Israel. In any event, these 4 aircraft attacked the Egyptian army. The leader of the formation was an American pilot, an ex-United States Marine pilot, Lou Leonard, who died just about 2 years ago. And 3 of the aircraft, including 2 Israelis, Asa Weizmann and Modi Alon, both of them had received their wings as pilots during World War II, but it was at a very late stage of the war, and although they didn't have operational experience, they had received their wings in the Royal Air Force. The leader of this formation, Lou Leonard, when he did his dive onto the target, he spotted an oil tanker, and his bomb, which hit the oil tanker, caused a tremendous explosion and started fires all over the place. Men were being burnt and equipment was being burnt, and the Egyptians were absolutely stunned and destabilized as a result of this attack. And they never advanced beyond Ashdod. And that is why there's a sign at the entrance to Ashdod which says Ad Halom. And that is exactly where the Egyptian army really stopped. Because the commander of the Israeli forces at the time, Shimon Abidan, was absolutely desperate. He said that if the Egyptians captured Tel Aviv and occupy the city where the government of Israel was based, the War of Independence would have been over. And that is why the War of Independence was Israel's most fateful war. If we had lost that war, we wouldn't be meeting here this afternoon. Now, let me introduce the Mahal story.
Sorry, Smoky, before, how did we get the aeroplanes? You said you'd mentioned...
I'm actually going to come on to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
I'd like to introduce the Mahal element into my narrative. You folks probably know that Mahal is an acronym in Hebrew for Mitnat Bei Chutz La'aretz. And there were 4,800 Mahalniks who came from 59 countries to help their brethren in Israel during the war. They weren't here all at the same time. They came at different stages right through to the end of the war. But nevertheless, they came, and there were men and women and non-Jews. There were 168 non-Jews. 92 of them were flyers in the Air Force. So they were a very serious component of the Israeli Air Force. In fact, 21% of the flyers in the Air Force were non-Jews. Now, there were some really outstanding Jews amongst the Machonics. Mickey Marcus was a colonel in the United States Army during World War II. Very brilliant man. In fact, he wrote the handbook for the IDF. He was posted as the commander of the Jerusalem front, and he was in charge of the construction of a second road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because, as I said, the main road had been cut off by the Egyptian army and Jerusalem had been under siege. Unfortunately, he was tragically killed. What happened was that he went out of his tent one night to do a pity, and he had a white sheet around him because it was cold, and an Israeli soldier challenged him for the password. He didn't understand a word of Hebrew, he couldn't give the password, and he was shot dead by the Israeli soldier. An absolutely tragic episode. Then there was Paul Schulman. Paul Schulman was appointed as the commander of the Israel Navy. He had been responsible for purchasing a number of ships in the United States. They weren't really warships, but they were fitted with guns and ammunition and so on and so forth. And then there was Ben Dunkelman. Ben Dunkelman was a highly decorated Canadian officer, and he was appointed to head the 7th Brigade. The 7th Brigade, in fact, relieved the Lower Galil and the Upper Galil and the Western Galil during the fighting period. And then there was a non-Jew by the name of Tadi Difre, who actually assumed an Israeli nom de plume, and his name was Teddy Eitan. And now I come to two Air Force men who really made an incredible contribution to the state of Israel. The first one, and Yigal, you may be familiar with his name, was Al Schwimmer. Al Schwimmer served as a flight engineer in the United States Air Force during World War II. Al was truly a man of vision and courage. He set up a team in the United States to smuggle aircraft out of the United States. And he succeeded in smuggling 11 C-46 big transport aircraft, 2 very large Skymasters, 3 Constellations, and 4 B-17 heavy bombers. The B-17 heavy bombers were iconic aircraft in the bombing of Germany, which really brought about the end of the war against the Nazis. I should mention, by the way, that the first Machonics really started in 1947. Mainly Americans who manned 10 ships for bringing over Jews from the displaced camps in Europe after the Holocaust. And they had all the problems which were presented to them by the British Navy, which was a blockade against the entry of Jews into Palestine. Now, perhaps the most famous ship was the Exodus 47. Two British destroyers attacked the ship and forced it to return back to Germany. There were 5,500 passengers squeezed in to that ship. And in fact, on the 18th of July of this month, or next month, in Israel, there's going to be a dedication in Haifa. In the port, there's a sculpture of the Exodus 47, which is going to be in an area where the cruise ships which visit Israel, they'll see this sculpture of the Exodus 47 and read the story of what happened. And as a result of the Exodus incident, that was the United Nations decided on partition of Palestine. So a lady who's a wonderful writer said that this was the ship that launched the state of Israel. And to a large extent, it's very true. Okay, so to answer your question, Les, the Israel Airforce had two very interesting characteristics. Firstly, it was born in the heat of battle. There was no Israel Air Force before. And secondly, 95% of the flying crews and the ground crews were mechanics.
95.
The Air Force started off very, very modestly and humbly. We had light civilian aircraft, Oysters and Fairchilds and Bonanzas, and the first Rapide was turned into an ambulance aircraft, and at nights it was able to fly down to the Negev and bring back the injured soldiers and so on and so forth. The beginnings were very humble indeed. And the air crews started coming, the mechanics, to Israel. And the Air Force had two formidable problems. One, how to acquire aircraft. There's a United Nations embargo. There is the American Neutrality Act. The FBI and the CIA and the British MI6 were all trying to stop Israel from getting a military equipment. And so Al Schwimmer, who acquired these aircraft in the United States, they were dispersed at separate bases. They were then flown to Panama and to the Caribbean and to Brazil, across the Atlantic, into Europe and the Mediterranean, on their way to Czechoslovakia. I mentioned that Schwimmer had tremendous foresight. He realized that because of the embargo, Israel would not be able to acquire any equipment via sea or via land. The only route of communication would be by air. Now, Israel acquired 25 Avia S-199s, the Messerschmitts, from Czechoslovakia. Firstly, our pilots had to be trained on this aircraft. They were trained at a base in Czechoslovakia. And there you had one of the ironies of war. Here were Jewish guys flying in German suits, German helmets, and in aircraft which had the swastika on it. They were Czech aircraft. Anyhow, the problem then was how to get them to Israel. So they were dismantled in Czechoslovakia. They were flown in the transport aircraft that Swimmer had smuggled out. And there was an air bridge between Czechoslovakia and the Telmov bases in Israel. And so the components were packed into the transport aircraft. They were flown by night because they couldn't fly during the day because of the Egyptian fighter aircraft. They weren't armed. And they landed in Israel. They were unloaded. They brought equipment for the Air Force and for the Army and for the Navy. It was really our only route of communication. And the organization called Air Transport Command, ATC as we used to refer to it, that was parallel to the Israel Air Force, and their job and responsibility was to transport equipment from Czechoslovakia, as I said, the only country that was prepared to break the United Nations embargo. And that's how it came about, that the first 4 aircraft were assembled in Israel and went into action on the same day. Those aircraft were not even air tested, and their armament systems were not checked. There was no time. And the Air Force did not want the Egyptians to know that we had acquired combat aircraft. So that really was the biblical miracle of the 29th of May 1948. The first commander of 101 Squadron, which was the first fighter squadron in the Air Force, was Modi Alon, a young Israeli, a remarkable man. At the age of 25, he commanded a fighter squadron, and the pilots, who had years of fighter experience against the German and Japanese air forces, were under his command, and everybody admired this young Israeli for his qualities of command, of leadership, and so on. In fact, on the 3rd of June, he shot down 2 Egyptian bombers that were on their way to bomb Tel Aviv. On the 10th of June, it was before the first Hafagah. The Hafagah was a ceasefire. And we decided, we borrowed really, a DC-3 aircraft from a South African company which was owned by 3 Jewish guys. And we took 16 80-kilo bombs inside the aircraft because this aircraft was not equipped for military service. And we had what we call bomb chuckers. And we tied these guys one to the other because they had to handle these enormously heavy bombs. And we did 6 runs over Damascus that night, dropping bombs and incendiary bombs and so forth, to give the impression that we had a number of aircraft that were attacking Damascus. And the psychological effect was very important. All the foreigners that were in Damascus decided to leave the city. It was no longer a healthy city.
And Smoky, you took part in that operation?
Yeah, I took part in that. I was the navigator on that operation. The second Machnik that I want to refer to was a wonderful guy by the name of Sam Pomerantz. He was a pilot and an aviation engineer. Israel had bought another 50 Spitfire aircraft from Czechoslovakia. And as I said, the problem was to get these aircraft to Israel. The purchase was done in August 1948. The American and the British governments put so much pressure on the Czechoslovakians that they cancelled the air bridge between Czechoslovakia and Chelmsford at just after we had acquired 50 Spitfires. The Spitfire was an iconic aircraft during World War II. So there was no way of Air Transport Command bringing over the Spitfire in components. So the question arose, how is it possible to get them to Israel? And the truth is, that was really impossible. But Sam Pomerantz really made a contribution that is absolutely historic. He removed all the armor plating in the Spitfire and its guns and its missiles and its communication equipment and its navigation equipment. He left just a shell, and he attached fuel tanks under the wings of the aircraft and under the belly and even in the cockpit. He increased the fuel capacity of the Spitfire from 85 gallons to 379 gallons, because this aircraft had to fly 2,400 kilometers, and the usual endurance of a Spitfire was 1.5 hours, and now it had to fly for 6 hours. The manufacturers of the Spitfires don't believe till this day that that could be done. It was an absolute epic in aviation history. And then they had to be flown from Czechoslovakia to Israel. What we did was, we had a mother ship, a C-46 Commando aircraft that led the formation. The first batch of 6 Spitfires that left Czechoslovakia, only 3 reached Israel. 1 was crashed because the undercarriage was damaged, and 2, they had to force land on the island of Rhodes, of Greece. So, by the way, the 2 pilots were charged by the Greek army as supporters of the rebels. There was a revolution going on in Greece. And the Greek army said, you guys are spies on behalf of the rebels, and they put them into jail in Greece, but the Mossad got them out after about 2 or 3 weeks, but we lost the aircraft. Then there were a number of flights that went off very successfully. And out of the 50 Spitfires that we bought, there were 22 which were available at a very critical time. The critical time was that the IDF was going to make its major offensive against the Egyptian army to drive them out of the Negev and back into Sinai. In the meantime, there had been a change in the tide of war. In October, Beersheba was liberated and the central Negev. Ben Dunkelman's 7th Brigade had liberated the Galil, as I have mentioned. We had destroyed a large part of the Egyptian Air Force. About 24 aircraft were shot down from the air. And then we attacked the airfields in Tel Arish and come to me in a moment, Tel Arish and not Birgav River. Do I have it over here? Okay, it'll come to me in a moment. Then in July, we brought the 3 B-17s, the heavy bombers, from Czechoslovakia to Israel. And that picture that you have over here was, we were deciding on how we were going, on what targets we would attack on their way to Israel. They had been fitted with bomb racks and fitted with bombs and fitted with their guns. And as you see in this photograph, the Chief of Air Force, Aaron Remmers, was with us at this meeting. The other two gentlemen belonged to the Department of Maps and Intelligence in the Air Force. And I must say that I was in favor of sending all 3 B-17 bombers over Cairo. I argued that if our attack on Damascus on the 10th of June had such a psychological effect there, what would be the impact of 3 B-17 bombers over Cairo? The Chief of Air Force said, look, we do not know how strong the anti-aircraft defenses are in Cairo. And his argument prevailed. We cannot take the risk of 3 heavy bombers, perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 being lost, if their anti-aircraft defenses are effective. So 1 bomber went to Cairo, 1 went to Gaza, and 1 went to Rafah. And then, of course, they moved on to Israel, and those B-17s were flown by day and by night. The mechanics and the support staff were absolutely fantastic. The spirit in the Air Force was really amazing. 101 Squadron, the fighter squadron, the mechanics used to sleep under the wings at night so that they could start working on the aircraft at first light. It was really a marvelous ruah that prevailed in the Air Force at the time. And by the time that the army really wanted to mount the offensive against the Egyptians, we had the 3 B-17s, we had 22 Spitfires, we had 2 P-51s, we had a Beaufighter, we had a number of C-46s, a number of Dakotas, and the tactics that we used were the same tactics as we experienced during World War II. We had a senior Air Force officer with the troops, with the forward troops, and in case there was a change of target or whatever other change may come about, the Air Force officer was in touch with operations, and so we really had a very tight operation between the Army and the Air Force. I might mention that after bombing two Arab capitals, Damascus and also Amman and Cairo, commandos of Khayr and Machelniks sank the Egyptian flag boat, their flagship, the King Farouk. And as I said, the Galil and the southern and the central Negev had been liberated, and now they were braced for the important offensive against the Egyptian army. Now that sector of the War of Independence lasted from the 22nd of December 1948 to the 7th of January 1949. So that the entire, and there was a directive from the United Nations Security Council that the fighting, there would be a final ceasefire on the afternoon at 2 p.m. on the 7th of January. That was the last day of the War of Independence, certainly not the last day of our war with the Arabs. The last day of the fighting was a very dramatic day. In the morning, we had two Spitfires which were patrolling the battle zone. And they saw 4 aircraft coming from Egypt, and they tackled the aircraft, and they shot down these 4 aircraft. We did not know that these aircraft were not Egyptian, they were British, the Royal Air Force. The background to that story is that Britain, in an agreement with the Egyptians, was responsible for the defense of the Suez Canal zone. And there were several squadrons of British fighters in that area because England was responsible for its defense. Yigal Allon, who was a commander of the IDF that attacked the Egyptian forces, his army was really driving the Egyptians deeper and deeper into Sinai, and the British became worried, how far would the Israelis go? Would they go up to the Suez Canal? So they sent out 4 aircraft to do an armed reconnaissance of the battle area, and the Israeli Air Force shot them down. So they sent out a second formation of 19 aircraft, 15 Tempests, which were Britain's latest aircraft, and 4 Spitfires. And at that stage, we had 4 Spitfires in the battle zone. And our 4 Spitfires attacked the British formation. They shot down 1 Tempest. They damaged another 5. And then our guys decided enough is enough. They realized that these aren't Egyptian, these are British. And the 7th of January was really the end of the fighting phase of the War of Independence. It was a highly dramatic day. Britain wasn't at war with Israel, and Israel wasn't at war with Britain, and here we have this momentous episode which took place. So that really completes my narrative on the War of Independence. Now, just a few remarks. 123 Machelniks were killed during the War of Independence, 119 men and 4 women. We have a beautiful Machal Memorial in the forest, and we have our yearly memorial service to memorialize our comrades who were killed during the war. 19 flying crews were killed mainly due to accidents. When we attacked the Egyptian army on the 29th of May, as I said, there were 2 Israelis, 2 Machoniks. The one Machonik was a South African pilot. He unfortunately was shot down and he was killed in that attack. 19 air crews were killed during the war, and including 9 non-Jews. And those 9 non-Jews are buried in the British military cemetery in Haifa. So really, to conclude my story, considering the overwhelming strength of the Arabs against the Jews at the beginning of the war, Israel's victory was really a near miracle. There is no parallel in military history to Israel's victory under those difficult circumstances. The Machoniks played a pivotal role. I just want to tell you a quote of Yitzhak Rabin. The Machal Memorial was dedicated in 1993. And Yitzhak Rabin said at that memorial service, he put it this way. He said, "You came to us when we needed you most during those difficult days of our War of Independence. You not only gave us your experience, but you gave us your lives as well, and Israel and the Jewish nation will cherish the contribution made by Machal during our War of Independence." Ben Gurion said that the contribution made by the Machal forces was the most important contribution which the diaspora made for the survival of the State of Israel. Here I would just like to make an interesting observation. In World War II, there were 1.5 million Jews who served in all the armed forces. 550,000 in the American forces, 500,000 in the Russian forces. 200,000 Jews were killed on the Russian front, 200,000 on the Russian front. Then there was the Free French and the Free Polish and the Underground. So 1.5 million Jews. There is no nation that had the same rate of, as the Jewish people, of military men who served in the armed forces in World War II. The pity is that bearing in mind the fact that 1.5 million Jews served, that there were only 4,800 Machelniks. If, say, there were 20,000 Machelniks, with their experience of World War II, there would be no problem today of the West Bank and of Jerusalem. But history doesn't forgive.
Yeah.
And so we're left with these intractable problems of how to solve this difficult situation. We had our last Machel reunion in 2008. You know, we are really a highly endangered species. There are very few Machelniks who are still around. But I said to them at that last reunion, you came, you fought, you conquered, and you will always be a part of the rebirth of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And here I'd just like to tell you one little humorous story. There was a fighter pilot by the name of Milton Rubenfeld, an American. And he had just been posted to 101 Squadron. And on the next day, he was flying, and together his leader was Asa Weizmann. And they attacked an Iraqi column. The Iraqis had invaded Israel, and Rubenfeld's aircraft was badly damaged by fire from the Iraqis. And he realized he wouldn't be able to get back to base, and he didn't want to bail out of the aircraft over Israel in case the aircraft fell on the kibbutz or a moshav or a town or whatever. So he flew out to sea. And when he got to the shoreline, he bailed out. And he landed okay. He was a bit shaken up. And there he sees kibbutzniks with rifles running towards him. Now he knew that the Israelis didn't know that Israel had acquired any fighter aircraft. And he was frightened that they would mistake him for an Egyptian and kill him. He ran towards him, his hands raised above his head. He didn't know a word of Hebrew, but he kept yelling, Shabbos gefilte fish, Shabbos gefilte fish. So he identified himself as a Jewish guy, and perhaps that may have saved him.
It saved him. The gefilte fish.
So, finally, there are 80 Christian states in the world. And there are about 60 Muslim states in the world. And there is going to be one Jewish state to the end of time. Zero.
Wow, Smoky, amazing. Wow, there are no words, really.
So,
It's unbelievable.
that's the story.
So what did you do after the war? You went back to South Africa?
Yeah, we went back to South Africa. We decided we're going to come another year. We didn't have a penny. I had spent 7.5 years in Airforce, not earning anything. And so we decided we're going back for 10 years. And I was successful in my work. I was in the insurance business, insurance and pensions in South Africa. And we came after 11 years with our 4 children. Both my sons were fighter pilots in the Air Force. And a grandson who was a fighter pilot. And now I've just got a grandson who has very recently gone into Modi'in in the army. He's a Machelnik. And at the moment we just have 2 grandchildren in the forces, one in the Navy and one in the Army. So that's the status at the moment.
You know, there's a saying, the apple val nie ver van die boom nie.
Yeah, I
The
suppose.
apple doesn't fall far from the tree, yeah.
Yeah.
Smoky, could you hold up the paper? You know, that was in the Jerusalem Post. So you are in that picture, in the, yeah, that's, I'll just take over here. Wow, that's wonderful. And on the other side? Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. Smoky, thank you so much. Unbelievable.
Marshall?
No, she asked about, we had a friend in the Philatelic Society. He was a pilot in the Airforce, and he served with Asa Weizmann later on. But it was not in the same generation. He died a year
much
ago.
younger than that.
It's 80. He was 80. The name is Yaakov Shabtai. Maybe you heard the name. He was,
I'm not
he was pilot in the army, and then later on a pilot in El Al.
Uh-huh. As a matter of fact, today, one of my sons, he was really the youngest pilot in the world to go onto the F-15s when Israel got its F-15s in 1976. And there were 5 Israeli pilots, and he was the youngest. Benny Pellet was then commander of the Air Force, and my son couldn't believe his luck in being chosen by the Air Force. And today, all 5 guys are at the Kinneret. They're celebrating the 5 first F-15 pilots in the Israel Air Force. Yeah. And that was a time, you may remember, Yigal, when Yitzhak Rabin had to resign when the government fell, because the aircraft came in on the Shabbat time. Yeah.
Is there going to be another Machal reunion?
No. No, there's so few left. And we had a number of active Machal societies in South Africa, in England, and 2 in the United States. The East Coast, there's only 1 really, and 1 in France. They were very active, but they were all just faded away, except for the United States. It's known as the AVI, American Volunteers for Israel. And they're fairly active, and they have a yearly remembrance service for Mickey Marcus at West Point, because he was a West Point graduate. And as I said, on the 18th of July, there is a machal touch to it with the dedication of Exodus 47 in Haifa Port.
Wow.
So,
It's amazing.
yeah, but now there are really so few Mahmoud's left. It's a generation that is really, because none of you have had your coffee. I mean,
Smoky, can I ask, were you instrumental in the Machal stamp? When the Israeli Philatelic issued an Israeli stamp on Machal?
yeah, of course.
How
Yeah,
was-
the Machal Society was...
And you were involved in that?
yeah. Oh, I don't even remember that. What do you say? You
So
really...
we have,
yeah.
so this is the Machal stamp. This is,
Thank you.
and this is another one. This is the Jewish soldiers in the Second World War, the volunteers. So that's you both part of both those stamps. One's the Jewish soldiers in the Second World War, and the other one's the Machal. And here's just a few other. These are just some more. Just,
Oh, lovely.
it's like here's just a few more other philatelic with the Airforce. You can give to your grandkids, your kids. And Yigal will I to you. No.
Sure.
And Yigal brought this. This is no Yigal.
Yeah.
Yigal is the one. Sure.
We had a mission in Jerusalem last year. And
This was an international philatelic.
it was with some countries. The next one will be in May, next May in Jerusalem. And they issued a block of stamp for, what was the subject, you remember?
It's beautiful. This is beautiful.
That is
The
wonderful.
Israeli stamps are remarkable.
Yeah, they are very nice.
They are remarkable. God, I support it.
So, Smoky, thank you so much. I tell you, it's been such an honor and a privilege to hear your story again. I can spend days and days hearing. It's you're a living legend. You're a living legend, a hero.
I wouldn't say that. I happen to have been one of the guys who was around at the time. And, you know, my motivation was, as a Jew, to serve my people in time of a war. You know, it was the same, and that was my motivation in World War II, that, I mean, we didn't know about the Holocaust, but we knew what the Nazis were doing to the Jews in Germany. Well, they started in 1933. And
Was it the news from Germany?
the
During the Holocaust, the news from the Second War arrived to South Africa about the Holocaust and about
no, the Holocaust really only became known after the war, but the Nazi persecution of the Jews was even before the war,
yes,
in
of course.
1933.
Yes, of course. But what I am asking, you was a pilot before the Second War. You didn't was a pilot before.
No, I, as I said, I finished my studies in December 1940.
Okay.
And in January 41, I volunteered to fight against the Nazis
Okay.
in the South African Air Force. So I was trained in the South African Air Force. I served with the South African Air Force during the war. In fact, I had a short period of about 6 to 8 months where I served with the British Air Force, but that was just along the way. But so I finished my service in World War II at the end of November 1945.
Yeah, this I understand, but what I am asking is, בעצם אני אגיד לך את זה בעברית, הוא הרי התנדב בכוחות הדרום אפריקאים והבריטים שהם היו מאוד דומיננטיים במלחמת העולם. עכשיו, בתור יהודים הרי הגיעו גם ידיעות על
Okay. What's the law that if you heard about the Holocaust, what's happened? All this massacre.
During the war?
During the
No,
war.
we didn't know.
You didn't know it.
You
We
didn't
didn't
know
know.
about Auschwitz and about...
We didn't know before. The news only came out in the Americans and the British knew about the Holocaust, but that was only from about 1944. And that is why the Americans, Roosevelt was the President of America, and he was asked to bomb the railways leading to Auschwitz.
He refused.
And he said that's not a priority for the Air Force. It was a crime. They knew what was happening, the Americans and the British. They knew.
The Americans.
Yeah, but you know,
But
אבל
didn't do
הוא
anything.
לא הסכים,
We didn't know.
הוא לא הסכים להפציץ לא את אושוויץ ולא את הרכבות ולא
לא
שום
נכון.
דבר, כי אם הוא היה עושה את זה, הוא היה מציל, ואומרים שגם, בגלל זה אני שאלתי אותו, שהוא אחד שהשתתף במלחמה, I asked him, because he was during the war and he was fighting there,
Yeah,
that's why I'm asking this question,
Yeah.
that I'm very interested to hear about את הצד של הלוחמים. אף פעם לא שמעתי את הצד של
כן,
הלוחמים.
אבל אנחנו לא ידענו.
זה פשוט, כל הזמן אתה שומע על ההיסטוריה,
כן.
אתה מבקר במחנות ואתה שומע את ההיסטוריה ואתה שומע.
נכון.
פעם ראשונה שאני פוגשת בן אדם שנלחם בזמן המלחמה,
כן.
באירופה, והשמועות התחילו להגיע הרי על השואה, והתחילו להגיע על כל מה שקורה, ובכל זאת האמריקאים והאנגלים סירבו להפציץ
נכון.
את אושוויץ ואת בירקנאו ואת
כן.
דאקו, ובמיוחד את טרבלינקה. ובגלל זה שאלתי אם בתור לוחם
כן.
אתם ידעתם
לא
על זה.
ידענו. לא ידענו בכלל על זה.
אבל אתה אומר שכן ידעו האמריקאים.
בוודאי.
הם
יש הרבה...
And also the British. The British.
Also
Also,
British.
the British also knew.
Yeah, the British also knew. Oh, that was an absolute disgrace.
Ben, do you want to ask a question to... Can I video? Do you mind if I video Ben?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
I read a story about bombing in Damascus with glass bottles. What is the story behind this bombing?
The attack on Damascus.
Yeah.
Ben, we really wanted to show some muscle. You know, all the time we were being attacked by the Egyptian Airforce, and the army was having a very difficult time. And as I said, this was on the 10th of June. So we wanted to show that we had some muscle. As I said, the aircraft was a Dakota DC-3. Now, that's a civilian aircraft, and it used to fly between Israel and South Africa. But because it was owned by 3 Jewish guys, we said to them, on one of the trips to Israel, we want to borrow your aircraft. So we took off all the markings on the aircraft, the civilian markings, and we loaded the aircraft with 16 80-kilo bombs. Very heavy. And as I said, when we were over the target, we opened the side door of the aircraft, but because the bombs were so heavy, we were scared that the guys could fall out with the bomb. So we tied one to the other, and they moved the bomb along. And we dropped 16 of those bombs over Damascus. But we did several sibuvim to give them the impression that there were a number of aircraft. Then we had a lot of what we call incendiary bombs that start little fires. We had boxes and we threw them over Damascus. And then we, after 6 runs, we came back, we got back to base from Ramat David. And then the news came out that the foreigners, they were terrified of Israelis, bombing our cities. And we didn't do any serious destruction. We didn't bomb the whole areas and blow them up and so. But b'chol zot, they were 80-kilo bombs, and they did a fair amount of damage. But psychologically, it was very important to show that Israel is fighting back, that we have shririm, and that was really the the main motivation to bomb Damascus. We had also bombed Amman, and then there was the 15th of July where we bombed Cairo, and the Air Force, really played a very serious role, and there was a wonderful spirit, and there were some of the pilots who had tremendous records from World War II, shot down 8 Germans and shot down 10 Germans and so forth. And here we had a young Israeli, and unfortunately he got killed. That was really very, very sad. And then the second commander of 101 Squadron was a South African by the name of Sidney Cohen. Now Sidney Cohen, he volunteered in World War I. He was a medical student, and he interrupted his studies to serve in the South African Air Force. Then, after the war, he went back to his studies, and he interrupted his studies again. He was a 4th-year student in order to volunteer to fight in Israel. He was a fantastic guy. He had over about 230 operational missions in World War II. It was an unbelievable record this guy had. And we had such interesting fellows. And then one of the greatest pilots in World War II was a Canadian. His name was Buzz Byrne. Buzz was a nickname. He was the highest ranking Canadian fighter ace in World War II. He shot down 32 German aircraft, and he damaged 9. He himself was shot down 4 times because he used to take incredible risks in order to shoot down the enemy, but he took those risks on himself as well. He was an amazing guy. And what happened? He was on his way to Israel to join the IAF. We had a base in Rome at a place called Urbe, just outside Rome. And then he was going to ferry a Norseman from Rome to Israel. And they had to test fly this Norseman before the flight. And he, together with another mechanic from England, also a guy who had a wonderful record in the Royal Air Force, they took up this Norseman to test fly it before their trip to Israel, and this aircraft exploded in the air and killed them both instantly. And we had a commission of inquiry, and the conclusion was that the British had sabotaged the aircraft. So as I said, Israel had not only the United Nations embargo, but you had the FBI and the CIA, and Israel had to survive with all those really, really difficult problems. That's why I say this victory was a near miracle.
It's a miracle, yeah.
So that's the story of the Dakota. And then after that night, they put on all the markings on the aircraft and it flew back to South Africa. We borrowed it for a mitzvah.
Why is the Dakota not the Commando Skymaster constellations? Why use this specific aircraft?
What, for that operation? It was that we didn't have any other aircraft. We didn't have the C-46s yet and so forth. They hadn't come. They hadn't arrived.
That's what they had.
The B-17s only came through in July.
They didn't even have it. It was loaned. Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So Ben, that's the story. And I hope you found it interesting.
That's not the word. It's
Yeah.
just
You know,
it's
there
living
are
history.
a number of films that have been made, and the latest one was called Above and Beyond the Birth of the Israel Air Force. If you have a chance to see it,
It's brilliant. I've seen it. It's phenomenal. I've
It's-
seen that movie. It's incredible.
Yeah, but
It's incredible.
you know, Les,
It
I
really is
think
incredible.
that this story should really be a full-length film
It's true.
instead of a documentary. And Nancy Spielberg, the sister of Steven Spielberg, she produced Above and Beyond.
Yeah.
And I think from time to time I'm suggesting to her, because I know her very well,
I think so.
that they should really do a full-time film, a full-scope film on it, you know. It's such an amazing story.
Smoky, can I just ask you, if not for the Israeli Air Force and the Machalniks, maybe the War of Independence, maybe we
could not have won the
we
war
wouldn't
of
be here today.
We could not have won the War of Independence.
if without the
Machal was really
yeah.
a critical factor in the idea. No question about
No
it.
question.
I mean, there wasn't an Air Force בכלל.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
מחל לא היה רק בחיל האוויר, מחל היה גם בשריון.
כן, כן.
הם היו בכל...
כן, כן, the three Palmach brigades.
יש גם את זה שבא ולחם פה בארץ, שהקים את כוחות המחץ, איך קראו לו? לא לוינגר, האנגלי.
Wingate.
וינגייט, בדיוק.
וינגייט.
שגם הוא היה ממחל.
כן, אבל וינגייט היה סיפור לעצמו בעצם. וינגייט, הידיד.
הידיד של ישראל, הידיד של היהודים בזמנו. כי אז עוד ישראל לא הייתה בעצם.
Wherever he went, he had a Tanakh in his pocket.
Wow. Ord Wingate, I think it was Ord
Or
Wingate.
Wingate, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he was killed in Burma in an air crash.
Yeah. Wow.
שהוא באמת סיפור בפני עצמו.
כן.
Yeah. Put it together.
Yeah. הוא למד את יצחק רבין ויגאל אלון והחבר'ה האלה. He was a specialist in night fighting.
הכרת
Night
אותו?
fighting
Night
tactics.
fighting,
Wingate.
You know him? You met him?
No, no.
You
No,
didn't.
I didn't know him at all.
You know, it's another story, it's also a great story. לעובד מוות, של איך קראו לה?
דבור עומר. About זוהר לויטוב.
About what, Ben?
זוהר לויטוב.
זוהרה לויטוב.
כן. היא הייתה הטייסת הראשונה של חיל האוויר.
The first
woman
pilot.
of
Woman.
Israel Air Force.
You heard about her? Zohara Levito?
דבור...
Are you talking about someone who was in the Air Force?
The story is about the first woman pilot in the Israeli Air Force. Her name
yeah.
was Zohara Levito. She crashed on.
Exactly.
She crashed in 1947, I think.
Yeah. There were actually 3 women pilots. And you know, they really mainly did communication, flying to kibbutzim, helping out and so forth. They weren't involved in any of the combat missions. Yeah. So my wife was a mechanik in Chayil Aviv. She was an instructor in meteorology in Chayil Aviv. And her chanichim afterwards became squadron commanders and base commanders. But you know, we started off small, very modestly, the Air Force. And that is amazing. And the Air Force today, Atsum, the present Air Force commander and the one before him, my son who was an F-15 pilot, he was their madrich. So he had 2 star pupils, 2 commanders of the Israel Air Force.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And these guys are celebrating a weekend together, the 5 of them,
Now, right
the
now.
5 original guys.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, lovely.
Smoky, can I ask you a favor? I'm going to just switch this off. Wow, this was a full-page article in the Jerusalem Post on Smoky, and it was wonderful. Thanks, Smoky. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And so what's amazing about these 2 stamps, one is about the Jewish soldiers in the Jewish Legion in the Second World War, and the other one is the Machalniks, and here we have Smoky, and you were in both of them. You volunteered in the Second World War for the Allied forces, and you were one of the founders of Machal here in Israel. It's such an honor, really. So you must be very proud when you see the stamps and you're part of the history.
Yeah.
You are part of this history.
I was just lucky enough to be around at that time.
No, you made it happen. You actually, you wanted, you could have had a very easy life back in South Africa, and you volunteered on both accounts.
That's correct.
Thank you so much.